Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Sorry for the error today on my thumbnail. I forgot to change the times to 9 p.m. and 6 p.m. 9 p.m. ET, 6 p.m. PT. So there's a little bit of a confusion, but in my announcements on Twitter, it was clear that it was at 9 p.m. So here we are. We have 4 topics for you tonight. The question of Harris's likely foreign policy, the progress that China is making internally in changing its own society. We call that China escape velocity. And then there's also the question of, can we have perpetual peace in the 21st century? And finally, we're going to do a little piece on the Venezuela elections, which, of course, were run by Maduro once again. And once again, Maduro is victorious, in spite of all the election interference from the United States, which was very considerable. But he still won by 51-44. So, okay, there it is. I see Lana's here. Hi, Lana. Thank you very much for promoting the show, making sure everybody knew it was at 9 p.m. And April, hello, April. Nice to see you here. And of course, there are a lot of other people here, but I can't see them right now. But anyway, let's begin. Here's a piece by Alistair Crook, a very great analyst of foreign policy. The title of it is, hang on a second, let me share this on Facebook. They removed my post already on Facebook, or so they said. They're amazing. Somehow, God knows why they removed my post. There is absolutely no reason to remove my post. Maybe they've decided to remove everything from uns.com at this point. Well, no, they told me they removed my post, but evidently they haven't removed it yet because I can see it. So I don't know what they're doing. They're very, very confused, I think. Anyway, I'm going to share it now. And here we go. So let's share it to Facebook. You should be seeing the UN's review article by Alistair Crook. That was on July 29th, 2024. Is there a risk that Kamala Harris might, quote, go soft, unquote, on foreign policy? And here's a graphic of Kamala Harris putting a pillow over Joe Biden while he's in the hospital, rather joyfully doing that. I don't exactly view the situation that way, but Alistair Crook evidently does, or at least he allowed this particular graphic to survive. Anyway, U.S. foreign policy strategies are not widely discussed and are viewed by the ruling strata as vital and being of the essence. Well, he can say that again. Extraordinary times. Biden renounces his election bid via in the slimmest of Sunday afternoon postings. Did I say announces? Biden renounces his election bid. Retreats into a silence, which finally is broken by a, quote, long farewell, unquote, pronounced from the Oval Office. Biden's staff didn't hear of his renunciation until a minute before his letter was posted. Then the internet was struck down by CrowdStrike, and the head of the U.S. Secret Service gives an account of the Trump assassination attempt that leaves both sides of the aisle in Congress aghast at the seeming incompetence or mooting something, quote, worse, unquote. Everyone is left reeling, says Alistair. With all media information streams tainted and with no, quote, believable someone, unquote, to explain what is going on, we are pushed completely to the, quote, outside, unquote. For now, it is impossible to orientate. I think the estimable Alistair Crook used the wrong word there. I think he should have said it's impossible to orient, but okay. The media increasingly is about one thing, quote, let us think for you. Let us be your eyes and ears. Make our new words and phrases into your language. The explanations and hypotheses that offer appear so unconvincing that they evoke rather a deliberate attempt to disorient the public, and to loosen their grip on reality. Nonetheless, even if the essence of the internal U.S. conflict is shrouded, a veil on the working of the deep state has been peeled away. It is widely understood the Biden ouster was masterminded behind the curtain by Barack Obama. Pelosi was the, quote, enforcer, unquote. Quote, we can do this, Biden's ouster, the easy way or the, quote, hard way, unquote, unquote. Pelosi warned the Biden circle. Rod Blagojevich, who has known Obama since 1995, explains the gist of what is happening in the Wall Street Journal. By the way, Rod Blagojevich was the former governor of Illinois who ended up in jail for a time and somehow got this article into the Wall Street Journal. He and Obama, grew up in Chicago politics. We understand how it works with the bosses over the people. Mr. Obama learned the lessons well, and what he just did to Mr. Biden is what political bosses have been doing in Chicago since the 1871 fire, selections masquerading as elections. Mr. Obama and I know this kind of Chicago politics better than anyone. We both rose up in it, and I was brought to ruin by it, unquote. Well, before I go on with another quote from Rod, okay, I have to ask or say that nobody was crying when the political bosses, specifically Mr. Obama, did the same thing to one Mr. Bernie Sanders in 2020, following a similar thing done to Bernie Sanders in 2016 by the bosses. So I don't know if it's only Chicago politics. Seems to me it might be San Francisco politics also. Seems to me it might just be Democratic Party politics. In any case, quote again, while today's Democratic bosses may look different from the old-time cigar-chomping guy with the pinky ring, they operate the same way in the shadows of the back room. Mr. Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and the rich donors, the Hollywood and Silicon Valley elites, are the new bosses of today's Democratic Party. Well, I'm afraid I have to add to that. It's just that the Hollywood and Silicon Valley elites After all, there are all the rich donors who are supportive of Israel rather than of the interest of the United States and who produce awfully big money both for Democrats and for Republicans through their APAC vehicles, okay, and also DMFI and other PACs and super PACs uh, that absolutely favor what Israel and Netanyahu want over what the people of the United States want. So we have to add to Hollywood and Silicon Valley elites because there are Wall Street elites too. And there are gambling casino elites also who are very important. They call the shots. The voters, most of them working people, are there to be lied to, manipulated, and controlled. And, quote again, all along, Mr. Biden and Democratic politicians have been claiming that this year's presidential race is about saving democracy, quote unquote. They're the biggest hypocrites in American political history. They have successfully maneuvered to dump their duly elected candidate for president. No, he wasn't duly elected. Those primaries were fixed. They were fixing the primaries in his favor. He wasn't duly elected. He was rigged to win those primaries. Going on. Biden's unfitness to run for re-election today didn't just happen. The Democrats have been covering it up for a long time. However, after June's presidential debate, Mr. Obama and the Democratic bosses could no longer hide his condition. The jig was up and Joe had to go, unquote. And quote again, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago next month will provide the perfect backdrop in place for Mr. Obama to finish the job and choose his candidate, not the voters' candidate, democracy, no Chicago ward boss politics, yes. Here I have to add that maybe Mr. Obama won't be so successful after all because Mr. Biden threw him a curve when right after he renounced his candidacy, he also chose Kamala Harris to succeed him. And Mr. Obama reportedly wanted somebody else and wanted an open convention so he could be the boss in the context of the open convention. And Mr. Obama did not get that. And when the donors responded with 250, well, it was 100 million from small donors and 150 million from the really large donors. When, in other words, the donors responded with 250 million after the announcement before Kamala Harris, and when the polls started showing her starting to gain ground on Mr. Trump, then the game was over, and Mr. and Mrs. Obama felt they had to endorse Kamala Harris. So, unless there's some wacky surprises at the convention, the chances are 99%, I regret to say, that she is going to be the choice. I think it would have been much better for the country and for democracy if Mr. Biden had failed to endorse her. He was reported to have had reservations about her. And if they had taken the month of August to lobby for various candidates and selected someone who would have made a stronger candidate, okay, than Ms. Harris, who, by the way, is also the choice of the donors with those 150 million of big donors going for her in the first couple of days after this election by Joe Biden. Well, it seems that Kamala Harris, who never won a primary, is again about to circumvent the primary process through orchestrated acclaim, which rumors suggest is concerted by the Clinton family, whilst the Obama family, dons of the Chicago political mafia, are against her and fume quietly. So that paragraph seems to contradict his earlier statements about Obama being the ward boss. the Obama family came into contact with the other ward boss, uh, specifically the Clinton family, who had things lined up, had the donors all lined up for her. Uh, Harris is an interesting character. She has strong roots, okay, in the Clinton family. She's also strong with the Obama family, and she's also quite strong with the Pelosi family. So there it is. Uh, uh, lots of the political oligarchs found her to be acceptable to them. Is it done? Will Kamala Harris be the Democratic contender? Asks Crook. Maybe so. But were there to be a major international crisis, say in the Middle East or with Russia, possibly things might change. How so? To get where Harris is, quote, went from being a tough on crime prosecutor as a district attorney in California to the far left, unquote. California delegates at the RNC told the American Conservative. Yeah, Alistair Crook reads things like the American Conservative too much. She and Gavin Newsom, in charting their rise through the Democratic Party of 2024, tried to keep tacking to the far left. They had to be the most extreme on crime, on abortion, on DEI, on the open border, on economic policy and confiscation level taxation. That really doesn't play well in most of the country. I think Alistair Crook is showing his Tyler Cowen type of bias here, because I think he reads Zero Hedge a lot. Harris has also differentiated himself from Biden's foreign policy by being explicitly more sympathetic to the plight of Gaza's Palestinians. Well, maybe so, but she's not overwhelmingly hugging them, and certainly not hugging the people who demonstrate and protest, okay, in the streets. U.S. foreign policy strategies, however, are not widely discussed publicly and are viewed by the ruling strata as vital and being of the essence. The electorate will not be privy to what those entanglements are at the structural level, since they involve state secrets. Nevertheless, much of U.S. politics rides on the back of this, quote, less divulged, unquote, the bedrock. Will Harris commit to these foundations of foreign policy structures, i.e., such as the Wolfowitz Doctrine? That goes back, of course, to, I think that goes back as far as Bush 41, but certainly as far back as the Clinton administration. Will she go soft on the structures out of a desire to tilt towards the progressive wing of the Democratic Party in respect to Gaza? Will she go party partisan and break the bipartisan canon in foreign policy already under stress? He didn't say in foreign policy, but that's what he means in foreign policy. Ignore the money laundering aspect of foreign policy expenditure. The important thing is that no one can be allowed to go soft on these policies and treaties on which the, quote, free world, unquote, structurally now depends and has done so for decades. That is the deep state stance. It will not play well in the U.S. were Harris to, quote, go soft, unquote. There was clear evidence in Netanyahu's address to Congress that the long-standing bipartisan consensus to back Israel has eroded. This will worry the foreign policy grandees. The grandees, yes. Quote, the one adhesive that has maintained the resilience of the Israeli relationship is, quote, bipartisanship, unquote, said Aaron David Miller, a former Middle East negotiator and advisor to Republican and Democratic administrations. Quote, that is under extreme stress, he added. Quote, again, if you have a Republican view and 2 or 3 Democratic views about what it means to be pro-Israel, the nature of the relationship is going to change, unquote. Mr. Netanyahu is evidently well aware of this risk. He struck a pointedly bipartisan tone throughout his address, and the address undoubtedly was a masterful display of his feel for the American political psyche It hit the required spots and carefully melded into a, quote, State of the Union, quote, unquote, mode of delivery and structure. I think that's very correct, yes. Of course, there were dissenters, yet Netanyahu seized the audience with his, quote, crossroads of history, unquote, grand theme, which portrayed Iran's, quote, axis of evil, unquote, confronting America, Israel, and their Arab allies. And he cemented his hold over much of that audience by promising that together America and Israel would prevail. Quote, when we stand together, something very simple happens. We win, they lose, and my friends, unquote, he pledged, quote again, we will win, unquote. It was a replay of the, quote, Israel is America and America is Israel, unquote, meme. So the foreign policy questions in respect to the Harris candidacy are twofold. First, might Harris, as a presidential candidate presumptive, choose to tear down, weaken, or expose the load-bearing foreign policy givens in the eye of the establishment? I think I myself would answer that question by saying, no, she's not going to do that, at least not immediately. Not until she's safely in the White House, and probably not even then. And secondly, what should be the stance of deep state panjandrums during a serious international crisis, should a serious international crisis arise in the near future? A clamor, then, will surely swell that an experienced foreign policy hand must take the helm, which Harris isn't. It would invite calamity with someone with no foreign policy experience to knock down certain policy structures, quote unquote, on which so much U.S. policy rides. Is Obama then awaiting the moment to insert his final choice as the new party figurehead, as the GOP convention goers suspect? Or is he convinced that Harris will not prevail in November and his party elder statesman would prefer to pick up the pieces of the party in the aftermath and mold it to his liking? Just to be clear, an international crisis precisely is that which Netanyahu intends to begin to build out during his Washington visit. Of course, the address of Netanyahu's grand theme, quote unquote, will be pursued quietly, away from the public gaze. Speaker Mike Johnson is convening a private gathering with Netanyahu alongside some of the most influential Republican mega donors and political power players. Netanyahu is on record that 7th of October has evolved to become a war on Israel from all points of the compass. Well, that's due to Netanyahu and what he did after the 7th of October. He has caused it to become a war on Israel from all points of the compass. And that Israel, going on with the quote, and Israel needs the support and practical assistance of the, quote, free world, unquote. That's really in scare quotes. It's really got to be put in scare quotes because the free world ain't very free these days. It's run by the frickin' oligarchs. Quote again, at a time when it is more viciously demonized than ever, unquote. Whilst Hezbollah is being confronted daily by the IDF, it has manifestly neither been dismantled nor deterred. That dictates that Israel cannot live with, quote, terrorist armies, unquote, openly dedicated to Israel's destruction and camped at and near its borders, Netanyahu complains. This constitutes the imminent crisis, quote unquote. The prospective Israeli military operation in Lebanon to push Hezbollah back from the border. Reportedly, the U.S. already has committed to limited support before this military objective. Yes, I agree, reportedly. Okay, that is true. But how much support is the big question. I expect some air support. I don't think that's going to deter Hezbollah very much because they're underground and not even the 1-ton bombs can reach them or reach, their rockets. And those rockets are about to fly against Haifa, and Tel Aviv with any full-scale war. But Netanyahu also insists that Israel needs the support and practical assistance of the, quote, free world, unquote, to counter the regime at the heart of the existential threat, Iran, unquote. What if Iran intervenes in Lebanon in response to a massive Israeli assault? Netanyahu cast this as the, quote, barbarians, unquote, coming for Western civilization, coming too for America as much as Israel. The recent Israeli attack on Hodeidah port in Yemen, at least in part, can be seen as an Israeli teaser clip to show the Western world that Israel is able to confront adversaries at long distance, 1,600 kilometers, showcasing its own in-flight refueling capabilities for a larger phalanx of aircraft. The raid inflicted heavy damage on the port. The message was clear. If Israel can do this to Yemen, it can theoretically strike at Iran too. I think that is a clear message, but also, I think the Yemeni message from the Houthis was quite clear too. They can send rockets 1,600 kilometers to Tel Aviv and do it easily. Of course, hitting out at Iran is entirely a different proposition. That's why Netanyahu is seeking U.S. support. There is a photograph of Netanyahu and his wife aboard the Wing of Zion, the new Israeli state aircraft, with a MAGA-style baseball cap on the desk beside him, only it is blue, not red, and it is emblazoned with two words, quote, total victory, unquote. Quote, total victory plainly is Israel, quote, winning together with the U.S. in confronting Iran's axis of evil, unquote. Is the U.S. aboard, or are U.S. foreign policy circles so distracted by the extraordinary succession of events cascading out in the U.S. and Ukraine that the elites cannot at the same time attend to Bibi's, quote, crossroads of history, unquote? We shall see. We shall see. I thought that was basically a terrific piece. I agree with certain parts of it, where I don't think Crook is as familiar with American politics as some folks are here. But by and large, it's a very, very good piece. And I think highlights the foreign policy issues very, very well. So I've already given, my commentary on it. I don't think I have to say much more. I can go on to our second piece, which is by FB is not CNN News. Yeah. They said your stream is misinformation. I appealed, so we'll see what happens. This is Wesley Wiles. Hi, Wesley. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, I think they're crazy. They're absolutely crazy. Robert Coleman says, I find that picture to be disgraceful. Yes. I don't think it's true either. I mean, I think that there was heavy pressure on Biden, but it's not clear it came from Kamala at all. I should say Kamala. Anyway, the next piece is by one of my favorites, Jeffrey Sachs. I'll present that now. It's called 10 Principles for Perpetual Peace in the 21st century. I phrased the topic as, can we have perpetual peace in the 21st century? Jeff Sachs says, the United Nations-based structures are fragile and in need of an urgent upgrade. We should consider this one at the UN Summit of the Future in September. Next year will mark the 230th anniversary of Immanuel Kant's celebrated essay on perpetual peace, quote unquote, written in 1795. The great German philosopher, yes, one of the greatest philosophers of all, okay, Immanuel Kant, the great German philosopher put forward a set of guiding principles to achieve perpetual peace among the nations of his day. As we grapple with a world at war and indeed at dire risk of nuclear Armageddon, we should build on Kant's approach for our own time. An updated set of principles should be considered at the United Nations Summit of the Future in September. Kant was fully aware that his proposals would face the skepticism of, quote, practical, unquote, politicians. The practical politician assumes the attitude of looking down with great self-satisfaction on the political theorist as a pedant whose empty ideas in no way threaten the security of the state, inasmuch as the state must proceed on empirical principles, so the theorist is allowed to play his game without interference from the worldly wise statesman. Nonetheless, unquote, nonetheless, as historian Mark Mazauer noted in his magisterial account of global governance, Kant's was a, quote, text that would intermittently influence generations of thinkers about world government down to our own day, unquote, helping to lay the groundwork for the United Nations and international law on human rights, the conduct of war, and arms control. Kant's core proposals centered on three ideas. First, he rejected standing armies. Standing armies, unquote, incessantly menace other states by their readiness to appear at all times prepared for war, unquote. In this, Kant anticipated by a century and a half the famous warning by U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower of the dangers of a military-industrial complex. Well, I guess he did anticipate that, but I don't think President Eisenhower went so far as to say that we should not have a standing army, did he? Second, Kant called for non-interference in the internal affairs of other nations. That was a very, very wise principle, as we see, because of the mess we've made and continually make by interfering in the internal affairs of other nations. In this, Kant inveighed against the kind of covert operations the U.S. has used relentlessly to topple foreign governments. And of course, in Venezuela, they were trying to do that in this election in Venezuela. There was all kinds of interference from the NGOs funded by the United States. Going on anyway. Third, Kant called for a federation of free states, which in our time became the United Nations, a federation, quote unquote, of 193 states pledged to operate under the UN Charter. I guess I have to deny what Jeff says here because I don't think the UN is what Kant meant by a federation of free states. I think that maybe Kant had in mind more the federal government of the United States, which by 1795 was actually a reality. Our federal government, is a federation. I think the United Nations is much more like a confederation, much more like the Articles of Confederation that we had starting in 1776. Unfortunately, Kant put great hopes on republicanism as opposed to one-person rule as a check on war-making, reasoned that a single ruler would readily succumb to the temptation of war. Look at what the Supreme Court is doing, trying to consolidate everything in the United States into the presidency and giving the presidency a prosecutorial immunity. Going on, though, quoting Kant again. A declaration of war is the easiest thing in the world to decide upon because war does not require the ruler, who is the proprietor and not a member of the state, the least sacrifice of the pleasures of his table, the chase, his country houses, his court functions, and the like. He may therefore resolve on war as on a pleasure party for the most trivial reasons, and with perfect indifference leave the justification which decency requires to the diplomatic corps or ever ready to provide it. On this, I have to comment that in modern times, the presidency has become so powerful that they don't need a declaration of war. They can decide to have a war without any declaration, okay, as we've done by arming Ukraine for years and years and making them a threat, okay, to Russia. And when Russia invaded, then doing all we can to keep the war in Ukraine going to the final Ukrainian soldier, which we are now approaching. And of course, our president has done that. And then by continuously supporting Israel, has allowed Israel to easily declare war on Hamas and to prosecute that war for months and months and months and months, which it could have done for barely a few days without U.S. arms shipments. So we may not have a king in name, but in foreign policy, the presidency has become a king in modern times. Going back to the article, by contrast, according to Kant, quote, if the consent of the citizen is required in order to decide that war should be declared, and in this Republican Constitution it cannot but be the case, nothing is more natural than that they would be very cautious in commencing such a poor game, decreeing for themselves all the calamities of war. Kant was far too optimistic about the ability of public opinion to constrain war making, says Jeff Sachs. Both the Athenian and Roman republics were notoriously belligerent. Britain was the 19th century's leading democracy, but perhaps its most belligerent power. For decades, the United States has engaged in nonstop wars of choice and violent overthrows of foreign governments. There are at least three reasons why Kant got this wrong. First, even in democracies, the choice to launch wars almost always lies with a small elite group who are in fact largely insulated from public opinion. Second, and equally important, public opinion is relatively easy to manipulate through propaganda to stir the public backing for war. Third, the public can be insulated in the short term from the high costs of war by financing war through debt rather than taxation, and by relying on contractors, paid recruits, and foreign fighters rather than conscription. Very good point by Jeff. Kant's core ideas on perpetual peace helped move the world towards international law, human rights, and the decent conduct in war, such as the Geneva Conventions in the 20th century. Yet despite the innovations in global institutions, the world remains dreadfully far from peace. Oh, yeah. According to the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, we're 90 seconds to midnight, closer to nuclear war than at any time since the clock's introduction in 1947. The global apparatus of the United Nations and international law has arguably prevented a third world war to date. UN Secretary General U Thant, for example, played a vital role in peacefully resolving the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, yet the UN-based structures are fragile and in need of an urgent upgrade. For this reason, I urge that we formulate and adopt a new set of principles based on four key geopolitical realities of our time. First, we are living with the nuclear sword of Damocles over our heads. President John F. Kennedy put it eloquently 60 years ago in his famous peace speech when he declared, quote, I speak of peace because of the new face of war. Total war makes no sense in an age where great powers can maintain large and relatively invulnerable nuclear forces and refuse to surrender without resort to those forces. It makes no sense in an age where a single nuclear weapon contains almost 10 times the explosive force delivered by all the Allied air forces in the Second World War. Unquote. Second, we have arrived at true multipolarity. For the first time since the 19th century, Asia has overtaken the West in economic output. We are long past the Cold War era in which the US and Soviet Union dominated, or the quote unipolar moment unquote claimed by the US after the demise of the Soviet Union in 1991. The US is now one of several superpowers, including Russia, China, and India, with several regional powers as well, including Iran, Pakistan, and North Korea. The U.S. and its allies cannot unilaterally exact their will in Ukraine, the Middle East, or the Indo-Pacific region. The U.S. must learn to cooperate with the other powers. Third, we now have an extensive and historically unprecedented set of international institutions for formulating and adopting global goals, e.g., regarding climate, sustainable development, and nuclear disarmament, also adjudicating international law, and expressing the will of the global community, e.g., in the UN General Assembly and UN Security Council. Yes, these international institutions are still weak when the great powers choose to ignore them, yet they offer invaluable tools for building a true federation of nations in Kant's sense. Fourth, humanity's fate is more tightly interconnected than ever. Global public goods, sustainable development, nuclear disarmament, protection of the Earth's biodiversity, prevention of war, pandemic prevention and control are far more central to our shared fate than at any previous time in human history. Again, we can turn to JFK's wisdom, which rings as true today as then. Quote from JFK: "So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and the means by which those interests can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures. And we are all mortal." Unquote. What principles should we adopt in our time that could contribute to perpetual peace? I propose 10 principles for perpetual peace in the 21st century and invite others to revise, edit, or make their own list. The first 5 of my principles are the principles of peaceful coexistence proposed by China 70 years ago and subsequently adopted by the non-aligned nations. These are: 1, mutual respect of all nations for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of other nations. Number 2, mutual non-aggression of all nations, but towards other nations. 3, mutual non-interference by all nations in the internal affairs of other affairs, such as through wars of choice, regime change operations, or unilateral sanctions. I think by all nations in the internal affairs of other nations is what should have said there. 4, equality and mutual benefits in the interactions among nations. And 5, peaceful coexistence of all nations. To implement these 5 core principles, I recommend 5 specific principles of action. 1, the closure of overseas bases, of which the US and UK have by far the largest number. The end of covert regime change operations and of unilateral coercive economic measures. which are grave violations of the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other nations. The political scientist Lindsay O'Rourke has carefully documented 64 U.S. covert regime change operations during 1947 to 1969 and the pervasive destabilization caused by such operations. Number 3, adherence by all nuclear powers, U.S., Russia, China, UK, France, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, to Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement, quote, all parties must pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to the cessation of the nuclear arms race and to nuclear disarmament, in a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control, unquote. Number 4, the commitment by all countries, quote, not to strengthen their security at the expense of the security of other countries, unquote, as per the OSCE Charter. States will not enter into military alliances and threaten their neighbors and commit to resolve disputes through peaceful negotiations and security arrangements backed by the United Nations Security Council. 5, the commitment by all nations to cooperate in protecting the global commons and providing global public goods, including fulfillment of the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and reform of UN institutions. Today's great power confrontations, notably the U.S. conflicts with Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, are largely due to America's continued pursuit of unipolarity via regime change operations, wars of choice, by unilateral coercive sanctions, and the global network of U.S. military bases and alliances. The 10 principles listed above would help to move the world to peaceful multilateralism governed by the UN Charter and the international rule of law. I appreciate this vision by Jeffrey Sachs, and I want to discuss it in much more detail. But there's no time for that, tonight. I'm going to suggest here that I come back on Thursday to really discuss these principles, in more detail. I think it's really worth a discussion to think about how they might be applied in today's world. So what I'd like you to do, if you're watching this or listening to this, is to focus on these 10 principles for perpetual peace. They bear heavy and serious discussion. I can't provide that tonight because I plan to do other things, but I will take this up again on Thursday night. So, with that said, I think this is a very serious piece, and it's well worth a much more serious discussion than I can do for tonight. So, let me leave this now and go on to a third piece, and that piece is by another one of my favorites, specifically Pepe Escobar, and let me share that with you now. China has achieved escape, velocity, not philosophy, velocity. It is now unstoppable. This was published by Pepe on July 24th, 2024. I did not immediately pick it up because, of course, I was taking some time off. Okay, so there it is. There is China. The 21st century is shaping up to be the Asian, Eurasian, Chinese century. The 4-day, twice a decade plenum, okay, that's just a meeting, of the Communist Party of China that took place last week in Beijing, designing an economic roadmap all the way to 2029, was a stunning affair in more ways than one. Let's start with continuity and stability. There's no question after the plenum that Xi Dada, or the Big Panda, will stay on the helm until 2029, the end of the current 5-year economic drive. And if Xi is healthy enough, he stays up to 2035, the fateful and uber game-changing target year for China to exhibit a GDP per capita of $30,000 per person, with massive around the world reverberations. Here we see the confluence between the progression of, quote, socialism with Chinese characteristics and the defining contours, if not of a Pax, but Sinica, at least of the non-hegemon-centric multinodal world, italics mine. Okay, he gives the italics, okay, on the multinodal terminology, because that's his term for describing it. His being Pepe Escobar's term. Okay, the proverbial U.S. think tank land xenophobia axis has been hysterical on China not being able to sustain a 5% a year growth rate for the next 2 years. The target once again stressed, okay, at the plenum. I'll be surprised if they don't exceed that target over the next 5 years. Anyway, going on, okay, a Russian analysis by the Center for Geopolitical Forecast makes a crucial point. Quote, the Chinese themselves have not bothered about the growth rate for a long time, since in 2018, they switched to a strategy of so-called qualitative development that is not at the expense of traditional industries, but on the basis of high technologies and the creation of new areas, such as the production of new energy sources and artificial intelligence, unquote. That's the rationale behind Made in China 2025, which is being implemented at breakneck speed. High-tech development leading the way towards a, quote, high-level socialist market economy, unquote, to be consolidated by 2025 and fully constructed by 2035. That's rather amazing, isn't it? The next step will be to attain the status of, quote, modernized socialist power by 2049 at the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, the PRC. The plenum proved once more that, quote, socialism with Chinese characteristics, unquote, or for the recalcitrant Chinese, modified capitalism is, quote, people-centric, unquote. The supreme values are national interest and the people's interests, attested by the fact that large private corporations remain under the strategic control, okay, of the CPC. I think that's the Communist Party of China, isn't it? It's idle to try to find in the final communique at the end of the plenum any restrictions on private capital on the path to, quote, to universal prosperity, unquote. The key point is that the role of capital should always be subordinated to the concept of, quote, socialism with Chinese characteristics. Watch the reform ship steadily sailing. Everything is explained here in nearly didactic terms, chronicling the birth of the, quote, decision of the CPC Central Committee on further comprehensive deepening of reforms to promote Chinese modernization, unquote. What is now already referred to colloquially all across China as, quote, okay, the decision, unquote, spreads across 15 parts and 60 articles, divided into three main sections, proposing more than 300 important reforms. Quote, uh, 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 the decision, unquote, in full has not yet been published, only the roadmap of how Beijing planners got there. Of course, this is no mere policy paper. It's a quintessentially CPC style dissertation where the details of economic and political measures are obscured by clouds of images and metaphors. Take a look, for instance, at this package, quote, at this passage, I should say, quote, to ensure that the reform ship sails forward steadily, uh, 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 but the quote, a decision, unquote, proposes that further comprehensive deepening of reform must implement the quote six principles, unquote, adhere to the party's uh, overall leadership, adhere to the people-centered approach, adhere to the principle of maintaining the integrity and promoting innovation, adhere to system building is the main line, adhere to the comprehensive rule of law, and adhere to a systematic approach, unquote. Most of the decision, quote unquote, six parts and a total of 13, is about economic reform. Will China pull it off? Of course it will. Just look at the precedents. In 1979, the little helmsman, the Deng Xiaoping, started to transform a nation of farmers and peasants into a well oiled machine of efficient industrial workers. Along the way, GDP per capita was multiplied by no less than 30 times. Now, the ramifications of Made in China 2025 are turning a nation of factory workers into a nation of engineers. Of 10.5 million university graduates a year, a third, okay, are engineers. The emphasis on AI has led, among other examples, to the automobile industry being able to produce a $9,000 electric vehicle in complete automation and make a profit. China is already a global leader in EVs. And BYD is building plants in Brazil, Thailand, Turkey, Hungary. Solar power, drones, telecom infrastructure, Huawei, ZTE, steel, shipbuilding, and soon also semiconductors. Thank you, Trump sanctions. While the hegemon spent at least $7 trillion and counting on unwinnable forever wars, China is spending $1 trillion in an array of Belt and Road initiative projects across the global south. The emphasis is digital / transportation, connectivity, corridors, geoeconomic imperatives intertwined with rising geopolitical influence. Hegemon hysteria aside, the fact is the Chinese economy will grow by a whopping 1.7 trillion only in 2024. That's more than in all but the last 3 years because of the COVID effect. And Beijing borrowed exactly 0.1 for this growth. And the US economy, by comparison, may grow by 300 billion in 2024. But Washington had to borrow 3.3 trillion for that, okay, to happen. Is that really accurate? I should know that, but I'm really not sure. There's probably talking purchasing power parity, but if we had 3.3 trillion, okay, in deficit spending, and certainly in 2024, and certainly our growth is certainly going to be at least 4 to 5 trillion, okay, in US dollars in 2024. But I have to check that out. I haven't been keeping up with the macroeconomic statistics. Researcher Jeff Roberts has compiled a very useful list of what China is doing right. When it comes to the nitty-gritty, numbers are staggering. Here are just a few apart from GDP growth. Foreign goods trade is up 6.1% to 2.9 trillion year on year. The trade surplus is at 85 billion, up 12% compared to 2023. I'm surprised the trade surplus is not higher than that. ASEAN trade is up by 10.5%, okay, to 80 billion. China is the number one trade partner of the individual ASEAN members. China had a record crop, 150 million tons of cereal grains. The courier sector handled 80 billion parcels, up 23% year on year. SMIC is the world's number 2 pure play foundry in producing chips after Taiwan's TSMC. China Telecom paid $265 million for 23% of Quantum C Tech, patenter of Misius, the world's first quantum communications satellite. Commercial aerospace launched 39% of China's 26 rockets. Invention patents rose 43% to 524,000. China is the first country with 4 million domestic invention patents in force. Baidu's 1,000 robo-taxis in Wuhan will break even in quarter four and will be profitable next year. China has 47% of the world's top AI talent. It added no less than 2,000 AI courses to school and college curricula since 2019. On world-class institutions, doubling as research leaders. 7 out of 10 are Chinese, including the top one, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which is ahead of Harvard. Exceptionalist China, quote, experts, unquote, believe their own fantasy that the U.S. allied with occupied Japan, Germany, and South Korea would be able to match and surpass China's pull with the global majority because they have more resources and more capital. Nonsense. Even more nonsense is to believe that the hegemons, NATO partners, quote unquote, as in vassals, will follow the leader in creating cutting-edge technology. The high-speed train that matters has already left the station. 21st century is shaping up to be the Asian, Eurasian, Chinese century. It's hard to comment on this article because the statistics are so impressive, but it's hard to put each one of them in context. I don't have the knowledge to put them all in context. They seem really huge, really, really impressive. But I think this article has to be studied and analyzed very closely for comparison to the rest of the world. But off the top of my head, it has seemed to me for a long time, through reading various articles and seeing all kinds of videos, that the Chinese are doing amazing things. And so this article does not really surprise me. I mean, this has been going on. Major changes in China have been going on year after year after year. every time you see a new video on China, you're more and more amazed of what uh, it's done. Uh, I don't want to get into uh, the issue of democracy versus totalitarianism here, because I don't think China is really totalitarian. There's a lot of decentralization there and a lot of bottom up stuff that's going on in China. But with respect to the structure of the economy, while there's a lot of decentralization, there's a lot of centralized guidance uh, from the government uh, and from the CCP. And uh, this combination of decentralization and essential centralization has been very, very successful for China over a very long time now. Over, what is it, 45 years, 46 years, 47 years. I think this progress is very likely to continue. And I see that when we compare it to our own economy, we see a situation where our own economy has been in relative stagnation for a long time. Now we compare ourselves, to other Western countries, and we see that we are in good financial shape compared to ourselves at other times in the past and to other Western countries. But we are not making change in anything like the way that China is making change. We are not, we don't have the educational efforts of China. We don't have the scientific and engineering efforts of China. We are just not growing, in the same way. Now, obviously, there are issues of growth and climate change. And the question is whether the growth is such that it engages, with climate change. Yes, education, has been essential as uh, uh, is, the point, that Pepe is making here. 47% of the world's top AI talent has been produced by China. It added no less than 2,000 AI courses to school, and college curricula. Uh, let's see, what was it? Of 10.5 million university graduates a year, is a huge amount. A third, are engineers. 3.3 million engineers each year, getting graduated. That is not happening here in the United States. We can match them up, with the number of university graduates per year, but not when it comes to science, and engineering. And their output, of university graduates will be continuing year after year as they continue to modernize the economy of China, and as they begin to meet uh, uh, the goal of $30,000 per capita GDP. But China, is doing amazing things with its socialist model. It's not a democratic but socialist model, of course, but there are elements of democracy within it. And the socialism is not absolute. It's a partnership of socialist guidance. Lots and lots of capitalist activity, in China. And the whole thing is solving Chinese problems very, very rapidly. And we shouldn't be ignoring that. That is simply essential. So I'm going to stop sharing this. Oh, I stopped sharing this in the wrong way. I shouldn't have done that. Hang on a second. Let me get back. Oh, excuse me for a second while I do something else here. There was another piece I meant to cover tonight, but okay, I haven't put it in what I listed. So anyway, let me go on. I'm going to go on right now. With what's going on, okay, in Venezuela. But before I do that, okay, let me check on your. So Robert says GDP should grow faster in China as they have 4 times the population of the United States. We're not talking about GDP growing faster in China, Robert. We're talking about GDP per capita growing faster in China. That's what we're talking about. Okay, before I go on to the next one, I'm going to take some of your comments now. So Amber said, I just shared this post and Facebook flagged it as spam. I never get flagged like this, but it happened twice this week. We can expect a lot more censorship heading to November. It's ridiculous. Yes, okay, it is ridiculous. Specifically, my advice is share this post on YouTube. Forget about Facebook. Amber says, keep sharing. Truth, Joe, appreciate you. Thank you, Amber. I appreciate you too. Robert Copeland says, I find that picture to be disgraceful. Well, it may be disgraceful, but it's free speech. I mean, what can I say? Evelina says, glad to see you're on. Thank you, Evelina. I am feeling much better than I was a few days ago. Okay, and the Shomac Shuti, also known as Wesley Weil, says, crap, Joe. Facebook just removed my post sharing the stream. They said your stream is misinformation. I appealed. So we'll see what happens. This is Wesley Wiles. Okay, thank you, Wesley. Lana says FB is nuts. She says it's on YouTube and on Facebook. She says, Amber, I truly don't understand what FB uses as criteria for removing content. I don't understand either. Absolutely. The UN facilities are structured as a confederation. Keynes' Bancorp plan is actually a base to begin a global federated system, starting with a single federated currency. Wesley, I couldn't agree more. Speaking of the Supreme Court, why is Clarence Thomas allowed to keep staying after all the evidence against him? Also, is Elena Kagan really Victoria Nuland's daughter? No, Elena Kagan is older than Victoria Nuland. She's older. Elena Kagan must be in her 60s by now. Okay, Victoria Nuland is like maybe late 40s. Anyway, that's something. that's really a riot. Why is Clarence Thomas allowed to keep staying? He's allowed to keep staying because the Department of Justice hasn't tried to indict him, which I think is what should be done. However, there's no law against the Supreme Court taking bribes. That's the shame of it all. That's what they've been doing. But I think there is an emoluments clause in the Constitution that they've sworn to protect, which may apply to them. That's an interesting question. Robert Copeland says, but Ukraine was never a threat to Russia. Nonsense, Robert. Nonsense. That's total nonsense. I mean, Ukraine was going to have missiles, was going to have intermediate range missiles that would easily reach Moscow, I believe in 90 seconds or something like that. It was ridiculous. John B. says, yet to see, but Kahn's vision of a federation of free states may come to pass with BRICS if it incorporates a degree of horizontal financial federation through a tax on trade surplus nations. Perhaps, John B., I don't think that's enough to create a federation. To create a real federation, you need more than a financial federation, as I believe the Europeans have shown us. Sachs doesn't understand economics. China exports its GDP to the Western world. Countries under their marketing regime, meaning C is a no-no. Well, this is what we should discuss next time on Thursday. Lana says, please remember to hit the like button. You don't want to export your GDP. If you export your GDP, you lose. If you import others' GDP, you win. Simple. Sorry about the grammar above. Okay, the delete is by the send of this tablet. Okay, Wesley, that's fine. I don't think it's as simple, as this. Okay, I do generally agree with the idea that in the short run, exports are real costs and imports are real benefits. That's one of the central propositions, of MMT. And I generally agree with that, but it is not always the case. And the reason why, it's not always the case is because sometimes when you export, you build up certain of your industries at the expense of the industries, for foreign nations, and you become dominant, in those industries. If those industries are very important for defense or the further development of technology or other key essential things, then your exports feed back and actually are transformed into benefits, for yourself. So that's where that simple tenet that exports are real costs, and imports, are real benefits, falls down. Robert Copeland says, look what China's doing in the South China Sea, as I don't consider that peaceful as they bully smaller nations. Well, that's true. I'm not saying China's completely peaceful. I'm not saying the Chinese are angels, Robert. If only Jeffrey Sachs were foreign policy minister. In our terminology here in the United States, the foreign policy minister is the Secretary of State. It remains to be seen whether Jeffrey Sachs will become the Secretary of State. First of all, it depends on who becomes the President of the United States. If Trump becomes the President of the United States, Jeffrey Sachs will certainly not become the Secretary of State. But he may have a shot at it if a Democrat becomes the President of the United States. He may have a shot of it if Robert Kennedy becomes the President of the United States. By the way, just a piece of news, with respect to Robert Kennedy. Well, two pieces of news, with respect to him. First piece of news is favorable. He his campaign submitted only today signatures in 9 more states. He had his signatures previously submitted to 30 states, so that means he's now up to 39 states, and he's completed his signatures, I believe, in all the states that have deadlines, okay, of August 1st, at least. There was one key state, that was Pennsylvania, that had a deadline of August 1st, and his campaign submitted for Pennsylvania. So that's on the good side of Bobby Kennedy. Now, on the bad side, okay, of Bobby Kennedy, he's come up with the idea that the United States should build a sovereign wealth fund by purchasing Bitcoin, a huge sovereign wealth fund, by purchasing Bitcoin, because he thinks that somehow Bitcoin can make us richer. Robert Kennedy does not understand fiat currencies, okay, at all. He just doesn't understand them, and he makes ridiculous arguments. I'll probably be considering those soon. But that's another poor policy being adopted by or suggested by Robert Kennedy. His economic policies are ridiculous. They are ridiculous. They will not work. Anyway, don't have time to go into this here tonight. China has an aging population. We'll see a gradual decline, okay, in its population. Yes, I think that's probably the case, but I think a little less population in China is probably a very good thing. Real estate companies are going bankrupt. Just looked at Evergrande and County Garden, among other companies that are going bankrupt. So what? I mean, so what if they go bankrupt? Why is that bad for China? GDP should grow faster in China, yeah, Robert says. Bye, everybody, Robert says at 10:01. April says, I can't praise China, not just the stuff on Temu alone is mind-opening. Got a hidden camera detector for free, and it's rechargeable. So many goodies. I absolutely love my wearable solar. You bought a wearable solar panel? Oh, amazing. April says, I never have to hunt for power outlets as long as there's some sun. The price is $3.83. April says, those 10 principles of peace is all common sense. I don't think they're exactly all common sense, as we'll see when we'll discuss them. Andy says, April says, your live stream is still on my FB. Still on mine, FB also. I think there's a prohibition on sharing it because I got the error message when I shared it. Steve says, hi, Doc. Hi, Steve. And John B. says, China often accepts payments for its exports in foreign countries rather than specifying payment in yuan, keeping the yuan exchange value low. Yes, they want to do that so they can continue to export. Yes, that is what they do. Thank you, John B., for that comment. It was a very good one. Okay, now I'm going to move to the final piece on Venezuela. By the way, folks, very good comments there. So, I am sharing this piece. So this is from Common Dreams. The headline, okay, is Maduro wins third presidential term, in Venezuela. Yes, that is Nicolas Maduro. The U.S.-based National Lawyers Guild called Sunday's election a triumph for the Venezuelan people, especially considering the level of U.S. interference and attempted sabotage of the democratic process. That's the tagline on that. This is by Jake Johnson on July 29th, 2024. The Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, won re-election to a third term on Sunday, with just over 51% of the vote. One group of independent election observers described as a, quote, fair and transparent, unquote, contest, despite loud claims of fraud by the right-wing opposition, a narrative readily boosted by Western corporate media outlets. The usual game being played to try to overturn a South American election. The Consejo Nacional Electoral, CNE, Venezuela's election authority, said he won by 51.2% of the vote, with 80% of polling places counted. Edmundo Gonzalez, an ex-diplomat and the primary opposition candidate, won 44.2% of the vote. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who was barred from running in the election, claimed without evidence that Gonzalez won 70% of the vote. Surveys conducted ahead of Sunday's contest showed Gonzalez with a substantial lead over Maduro, but Jake Johnston of the Center for Economic and Policy Research noted that, quote, since 2015, pollsters have overestimated opposition support in Venezuela, quote, by an average of 29.5 percentage points. So if you take 29.5 percentage points here, then that means that actually Gonzalez got only 15% of the vote, right? Overestimated up. Well, no, I shouldn't compare that to what they estimated. 70% minus the 29.5% is what? That's roughly 44.2% of the vote. Nearly 60% of Venezuela's electorate of over 21 million people turned out for Sunday's race, according to figures from CNE, which face calls from experts and political leaders in the region, including left-wing Chilean President Gabriel Boric, to release detailed election results in the interest of transparency. The U.S.-based National Lawyers Guild, the NLG, said in a statement that its delegation of 5 election observers, quote, visited several polling sites in Caracas and also La Guaira, and shared notes and information with the 910 election observers present from 95 countries and many organizations. I wish we had those election observers here in the United States. That is, from foreign countries, present from 95 countries. Why don't we have those electoral observers here? We could use them. And I wonder whether we could do as well as Venezuela in terms of the verdict of the 910 electoral observers from 95 countries, many organizations, including the Carter Center, the United Nations, the African Union, and the Latin American Council, of electoral experts, unquote. NLG's president, Suzanne Attali, said Sunday's elections, quote, were not only fair and transparent, but also represented an example of popular civic participation, unquote. So their successful outcome is a triumph for the Venezuelan people, unquote. She added, quote again, especially considering the level of U.S. interference and attempted sabotage of the democratic process, particularly through sanctions and coercive economic measures aimed at producing, quote, regime change, unquote, in Venezuela, unquote. Speaking after CNE's announcement, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, little Blinky, said the United States has, quote, serious concerns, unquote, that the tallied result quote, does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people, unquote. A response that drew swift backlash given long-standing efforts by the United States to overthrow the Latin American nation's elected government and crush its economy with sanctions. As the Washington Post's Jeff Stein and Federica Cacco reported last week, quote, sanctions on Venezuela contributed to an economic contraction roughly 3 times as large as that caused by the Great Depression in the United States, unquote. And Venezuelan analysis tweeted, and who knows the will of the Venezuelan people better than the U.S. Secretary of State? This is a quote tweet, of a tweet by Moshe Schwartz, who's a YWN reporter, who said, hashtag breaking, Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Maduro announced electoral victory. We have serious concerns that the results announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. The international community is watching this very closely and will respond. So do they? Are they planning to declare someone else the president, of Venezuela, and try to install them in the same way they did with Juan Guaido a few years ago under Trump? Nearly 12 years ago, when Maduro's predecessor, President Hugo Chavez, was running for re-election, CEPR's co-director Marco Weisbrot reminded readers why the U.S. government continued to, quote, demonize, unquote, the idea of democracy in Venezuela, despite former U.S. President Jimmy Carter himself calling the Latin American nation's election system, quote, the best in the world, unquote. Quote, in Washington, democracy has a simple definition. Does a government do what the State Department wants it to do, unquote, Weisbrot wrote at the time. And quote again, the State Department tries to keep its eyes on the prize. Venezuela is sitting on 500 billion barrels of oil and doesn't respect Washington's foreign policy. That is what makes it public enemy number one, and gets it the worst kind of media coverage, unquote. Not much to say about that article. It's obviously is favorable to the electoral system, in Venezuela, and the election that was held. And I think it tries to be objective, in evaluating what actually happened. And of course, it's right on the money when it mentions the attempted interference in the elections, in Venezuela by the U.S. through sanctions, but not only through sanctions, through the non-governmental organizations, which the U.S. supports, and also through undercover agents. There's certainly CIA agents who are running around there. But the regime still stands, and specifically Maduro is still strong, and their attempts to mobilize communities, in Venezuela in back of them still continue. And I suspect that the future in Venezuela is going to be bright because they're going to tie themselves into bricks. And I don't think the U.S. can do anything about that. Perhaps Donald Trump can have another war if he becomes the president of the United States. Or perhaps a Democratic Party regime could put some more sanctions on Venezuela to try to finally get its people to kick out the politicians who've been trying to act in the best interests, okay, of Venezuela for a very, very long time now. So I will stop sharing that. We still have a few minutes. So I think I'm going to do something that I had originally planned to do, but that somehow never got done in the course of planning that. There's another Pepe Escobar article okay, that I'm going to bring up right now and will then share. And it's on Palestine. So let me just do that. Our attendance tonight, by the way, is very good for this stream. We're showing 41 people here right now, and almost everybody has stayed for the whole stream, which of course is very good. So thank you very much. China throws clout behind Palestine. This was published on July 26, 2024. 1,200 words. Okay, this is a picture of the meeting of Foreign Minister Wang Yi with various factions inside, okay, of Palestine in order to try to create a unified front of Palestinians for the sake of Palestine. Hong Kong. The Beijing Declaration signed earlier this week says Pepe Escobar, constitutes yet another stunning Chinese diplomatic coup, but the document goes far beyond affirming China's pull. The gathering of representatives of 14 Palestinian factions to commit to full reconciliation showed the entire world that the road to solving intractable geopolitical problems is no longer unilateral. It is multipolar, but multinodal. Multinodal is in italics once again. It features BRICS/Shanghai Cooperation Organization member China as an inescapable leader. The concept of China as a peacemaking superpower is now so established that after the Iran-Saudi Arabia rapprochement and the signing of the Beijing Declaration, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba chose to tell his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in Beijing that Kyiv is now finally ready to negotiate the end of the NATO-Russia proxy war in Ukraine. Palestinians who came to Beijing were beaming for Fatah Vice Chair Mahmoud Al-Alul. Quote, China is a light. China's efforts are rare on the international stage, unquote. Hamas spokesman Hossam Badran said the Palestinian resistance movement accepted the Chinese invitation, quote, with a positive spirit and patriotic responsibility, unquote. All Palestinian factions have reached a consensus on, quote, Palestinian demands to end the war, unquote, adding that the, quote, most important, unquote, part of the declaration is to form a government that builds Palestinian national consensus to, quote, manage the affairs of the people of Gaza and the West Bank, oversee reconstruction, and create conditions for elections, unquote. The three-step Chinese proposal, Wang Yi cut to the chase. The Palestinian issue, says the Chinese foreign minister, is at the core of everything in West Asia. He emphasized that Beijing has never had any selfish interests in the Palestinian issue. China is one of the first countries to recognize the PLO and the state of Palestine and has always firmly supported the Palestinian people in restoring their legitimate national rights. What we value is morality, and what we advocate is justice. What Wang did not say, and he didn't need to, is that this position is the overwhelming BRICS Plus position shared by the global majority, including, crucially, all Muslim countries. It's all in a name. Everyone in the foreseeable future will note that this is the, quote, Beijing, unquote, declaration, unequivocally supporting one Palestine. No wonder all political factions had to rise to the occasion, committing to support an independent Palestinian government with executive powers over Gaza and the occupied West Bank. But there's a catch. This will take place immediately after the war, which the regime in Tel Aviv wants to prolong indefinitely. What Wang Yi left somewhat implicit is that China's consistent historical position supporting Palestine may be a decisive factor in helping future Palestinian governance institutions. Beijing is proposing 3 steps to get there. First, a, quote, comprehensive, lasting, and sustainable, unquote, ceasefire in Gaza as soon as possible, and, quote, access to humanitarian aid and rescue on the ground, unquote. Second, quote, joint efforts, assuming Western involvement, toward, quote, post-conflict governance of Gaza under the principle of Palestinians governing Palestine, unquote, unquote. An urgent priority is restarting reconstruction as soon as possible. Beijing stresses that, quote, the international community needs to support Palestinian factions in establishing an interim national consensus government and realize effective management of Gaza and the West Bank. Third, help Palestine, quote, to become a full member state of the UN, unquote, and implement a 2-state solution. Beijing maintains that, quote, it is important to support the convening of a broad-based, more authoritative, and more effective international peace conference to work out a timetable and roadmap for the 2-state solution, unquote. For all the lofty aims, especially when it is patently clear that Israel has de facto buried the 2-state solution, as witnessed in the Knesset's recent vote to reject any Palestinian state, at least China is directly proposing what the global majority unanimously considers as a fair outcome. Also important to note is the presence of the diplomats from China's fellow BRICS members, Russia, South Africa, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, alongside the diplomats from Algeria, Qatar, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey at the signing of the declaration. Genocide is a wellness treatment. Now compare China's diplomatic coup with the U.S. Congress giving 58 standing ovations to Israel's psychopath in chief, peddling the notion of genocide as a wellness treatment. Bibi Netanyahu's heroes welcome in Washington takes the notion of collective psychopathology to new heights, and yet complicity in the Gaza genocide is not exactly an exception to the rule when it comes to American political leadership. The hegemons, political elites, with Franco-British help, have also been active collaborators and weaponizers of the oppressive Saudi, and Emirati bombing and blockade of Yemen, which over 9 years collectively caused even more civilian deaths than in Gaza. Famine in Yemen is far from over, yet this has been a completely invisible war to the collective West. At least karma ended up interfering. China promoted the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Riyadh has become a BRICS Plus member and deeply engaged in a de-dollarization drive, in which the petro-yuan is emerging. Moreover, the Yemeni resistance movement, Ansarallah, managed to single-handedly humiliate the U.S. Navy, the U.S. UK revenge, quote-unquote, was to open another war front, bombing Yemeni installations to protect Israeli shipping in the Red Sea and waterways beyond. As much as Yemen remains at war on two fronts against the hegemon in Israel, while keeping an eye on potential Saudi shenanigans, Palestine continues to be decimated by a fully U.S.-backed Israel. The Beijing Declaration will not mean anything if not implemented. But how? Assuming a partial success, the declaration may be able to put a spanner in the works of the absolute impunity of the Tel Aviv-Washington agenda, because after the Beijing deal, finding a collaborator Palestine government to perpetuate the occupation could be much more difficult. All Palestinian factions now owe China serious debt. Internal squabbling will have to cease. Otherwise, it would amount to a serious loss of face for Beijing. At the same time, the Chinese leadership seems very much aware that this bet is a global South bet, laying bare the hegemon's hypocrisy for the whole world to see. Much like the Saudi-Iran deal clinched in Beijing, the optics could not be more auspicious, especially when compared to the Israeli-American refusal of a meaningful ceasefire. Real Palestine unity will also give extra bite to each and every global initiative at the UN, the International Court of Justice, and other global forums. All the above, though, pales in comparison to the dire facts on the ground. The ideological genocidal Israelis, fully supported by U.S. political leadership, quote unquote, continue to get away with what they really want: the outright mass murder come ethnic cleansing of millions of Palestinians, something that in theory should lead to an absolute demographic majority for Israel's expansion into all Palestinian lands. This tragedy will not stop anytime soon. The Beijing Declaration won't make it stop. Only the hegemon, severing its weapons funnel to Tel Aviv, can force it to stop. Yet today, what we're instead seeing from Washington is 58 standing ovations, for genocide. This could not be more correct, and more apt. By the way, it was published at the Cradle, as well. The same one. A very wonderful post, I think, right on point, and very correct in contrasting the U.S. efforts with the Chinese efforts to bring peace. All the U.S. is bringing is war and chaos, and genocide, and China is trying to take constructive steps to bring about a Palestinian state and to end the genocide, in Gaza. So plaudits for China and boos for the United States. And we have to recognize that that is the truth of the matter. So, back to your comments. A few people have left. We're down to 38 folks now. But there are, a lot more comments. Steve, I guess it's GII, has come in and has waved. And Steve Wolfbrand says, "Hi, Doc." Hi, Steve. Great to see you as always. John B. says, "China often accepts payments for exports foreign currencies." I guess I read that before. "Rather than specifying payment in yuan, keeping the yuan exchange value low." And Steve G. I says, "Elon's big mad, laugh out loud." Yeah. I'm sure Elon is very, very, very angry because he wanted to overturn that regime in Venezuela. He really wanted that. And Maduro, says Steve GII, has put out an arrest warrant, for Maria Machado. Long overdue, I think. Steve says, shared and liked. How presumptive of Blinken to think that the re-election is any of his or the U.S.'s business. I know. But that's U.S. foreign policy. Steve Wolfman says, John B. exactly. And Steve GII says, the Venezuela military leader has confirmed support, for Maduro, saying they will not allow opposition CIA to disrupt the government. Because I think by now the Venezuelan military is a people's army. Venezuela needs to implement foreign agent interference laws to empower U.S. NGO interventions, following Georgia's example. Yes, I don't know if they have such laws at this point, but if they don't, they certainly should. Steve Grossrent says, smash the like button. Thank you, Steve. Steve GII says, Steve Wolfbrand is I think that's anti-Semitic. What's anti-Semitic? I couldn't get but the meaning of all the icons, but Steve Wolfbrand is certainly not anti-Semitic. April says, good article, Joe. All of them, actually. Steve G.I. says, it's Steve Gonzo, also known as Ghost Art Joe. Thank you. I think I'll continue to call you Steve Ghost Art then. How about that? Or Steve Gonzo. Anyway, thank you for identifying yourself. I guess we all have to hide a bit because it seems as though our opinions and analyses are certainly not welcome on Facebook, and they may not be welcome on other social media as well. Well, I thank everybody for coming tonight. I really enjoyed this stream. I hope that you enjoyed it as well. I have to say, though, I took off over the weekend to try to get some business done that I have to get done over the next couple of weeks, certainly. So I won't be able to do a full schedule this week. I'll be coming back on Thursday night, but I won't have a stream tomorrow night because tomorrow I just have to concentrate on getting to the point, where I can get my business done. And that will happen. Things will alternate like that until I make the deals for the websites, that I'm trying to make. I have some websites, that I'm selling, that I need to sell, in the worst way, to get into reasonable financial condition, once again. So I need the extra time, and I won't be able to devote them to streams. But I will be here on Thursday in order to further discuss the Jeffrey Sachs piece and the 10 principles, because I think a discussion of them is very, very important. So that's what I'm going to do on Thursday. I also may be having some very short interventions at various times, perhaps on Saturday. I think after Thursday, you probably won't be seeing me on Friday, but you might be seeing me on Saturday. So basically, I'm going to alternate days, until I get my business done. So thank you very much for coming tonight. That's all I have for tonight. But I'm going to have a good show for you on Thursday. So Steve Gonzo says, the GTSY, Joe, I'm not on YouTube as much since I had to switch names. Yes, on YouTube as much since I had to switch names. Yeah. Yes, I can imagine, Steve. I can imagine. And I'm sorry about that, of course. So good night, everybody. Oh, by the way, I could use a lot more likes. A lot more likes. I got about 5 likes for this stream. I keep forgetting to ask people to like the stream. Like, share, and subscribe, everybody. Like, share, and subscribe. That's important, of course. So, it's good to see you, Steve. It really is. Okay. And good night, all.